Hello, hello. So, we are going to have a look at my new single that just came out yesterday. Happy 420. Happy Oingo Boingo Day in the city of Los Angeles. This is a new single, kind of techno banger, outdoorsy sort of Burning Man style, kind of fire dancing, fire spinning, total kind of outdoor craziness, or even like a warehouse style kind of vibe on this track. Came out yesterday on Wulfpack Records, and I just want to extend a huge thank you to the Wulfpack team. Their crew is just packed with talent, and the great DJ producers. Having moved to LA about a couple years ago. They really caught my attention as being a really quality crew and having a lot of really great talent. And it's really really cool to get involved with the people that you just admire. And they this song, I tend to write songs in a lot of them at a time. So if it's singer songwriter stuff, I usually got a good 20 songs going at a time, and they just kind of finish themselves as they do. I like to just kind of pull them out and look at them and say, oh, what do you need to be shiny, and then kind of build upon them, and then they write themselves. Very much the same thing here. I had a good like 5 songs going in this type of techno vein, and then the majority of them were released. A couple of them were scrapped, but this one got completed, and just it didn't have anywhere to live. And I was like, man, this song's pretty cool, and it really didn't fit the sound of a lot of the labels that I was submitting to. So it just wasn't gonna happen. So I saw one day that Wolfpack was accepting submissions. I sent the song in, and I suppose the rest is history. Here we are now, and we're enjoying the fact that it came out. And once again, I just want to say a big thank you to the Wolfpack crew for having this song Accipiter come out on their record label. So we're going to do a production walkthrough. I'm going to take you top to tail on this thing, how I did all the drums, bass lines, synth parts, automations. We're going to talk a lot about those bird sounds, how they essentially are the melody of this track, and also really into question and answer. So if you guys have any questions or want me to go over something specifically, have at it. I'm happy to take any and all questions. So let's get into this. Basically, starting with kick. Okay, so we were just talking about the kick drum. Basically, it just depends on the style of the song. I would say 9 times out of 10, I start with my drum mix, and then when it comes to my drum mix, I pretty much always start with the kick. I mean, let's face it, unless you're making more like broken beat style of music, like break beats or like drum and bass or something like that, all the four to the floor stuff really is just so heavily dependent on the kick drum. The kick drum is sort of the Empire State Building of the track. So, starting with a good kick and getting a good kick tone is really, really important. Now, it's funny because as I listen back, this kick's all right. It's just not necessarily something that like leaps off the page at me. It's not one of those kicks where I'm like, ooh, that thing's a banger. But when I listen to the function of the kick in terms of the track, I'm really really pleased with it. I think it actually sounds really really big, really 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 loud and stuff. So let's just continue through the drum mix here. Kick into clap, and that's coming off of battery 3. And let's see which clap it is. This one right here. Okay. So that would have come off of a sample pack that I trust. Channel EQ, getting rid of those ultra lows. Basically, renegade lows are just going to ruin your kick and submix. Removal of resonant frequencies looks like about 1700 hertz. I had some trouble. Just a little bump here. I tend to not like to do cuts and adds on the same EQ. Usually what I'll do is I'll like use the stock Logic EQ to just do some cleanup, and then I'll use something fancy like the Neve or whatever, or the Pultec to add a little bit of like color EQ and interest, but that's okay. I did it both there, and then this is sort of my secret weapon when it comes to like getting more attack off of sounds. Like Transx wide is super good for like getting a lot of bite off of things. So you might have like a percussive sound or something like that that has like a really good transient on it. But if you want that transient to just really slap and to really cut and just get really aggressive, especially as things build up in your mix, Transx wide is a really good way to do that. Here's with the transient designer and then without. So you can hear that it's kind of just getting it feels like it's just louder if you're not like kind of if your ear isn't trained, but what's really happening there is it's just taking the transients and throwing them through the roof, which is exciting. Yes. Okay. So yes, I'm taking my own advice here. Yes, I did have like a little boost going here, a tiny little boost going at like almost six k or whatever. But then I'm getting a lot more bite and sort of harmonic upper motion with the API 550A equalizer. This is a really good one. So it looks like at about 10k, little tiny boost, 1.5k, a little bit more of an aggressive boost. Okay, so I really like the API. I think it's a darn good kind of, and it's not too complicated either. I mean, I've never ever had been in a well, I've used them in actual like tracking studios and recording studios with the band or whatever, but I've never actually had the time to sit there and like play with the thing in the flesh. So one of these days, I'd really like to be able to do that. Then that clap is being sent out bus 5. Bus 5 has some cleanup EQ. I'm sure this is just a reverb. Cleanup EQ for the reverb. These are my reverb settings. I went with Rverb. There's sort of like, I'd like to say that there's some rhyme and reason to why I choose the reverbs that I do, but it's just, I just feel like anytime I'm finally at a point where I'm going to start messing with a reverb or something like that, I just scroll through a few of them and try a few of their presets and stuff like that because what's good for the goose ain't good for the gander. I mean, there's times when this really works for me, and then in the very next track, I would be like, I can't use Rverb at all, you know? In which case, I'm using the Valhalla a lot. I think the Valhalla is a damn good reverb, and I really like. What are some of the other verbs I'm really into right now? For dance music, this 2C Aether plugin is pretty serious business. I really like this thing. If it wants to load, it's a really good one for like dance music and stuff like that. Anyway, shuffling through reverbs, trying different things out, seeing what works. So that clap is being then sent off to that reverb just a little bit. Let's get into the main loop. Right. So what's happening there? That main loop. Unfortunately, I've done a lot of rendering to audio, which an inordinate amount. In fact, it looks like the vast majority of this stuff has been rendered to audio. But that would have just been like a loop off a sample CD. That was then I chopped it. I use Rex. I like to use Rex from Recycle for my loop editing and chopping. I know that there's plenty of other programs that do it and do it well. I just really like when Rex pumps out super clean slices and I can adjust the ADSR on them the whole way through. It makes all the difference for me. So this would have been a loop that just kind of came out of the program and then got the blocks kind of stacked like a chromatic scale, and then I've rearranged the blocks or muted some out, and I created the rhythm of my own, and then you know played with the velocities a little bit to get things to kind of bounce and have motion and stuff like that. So it's, in my opinion, sort of a cardinal sin of making dance music to just take something off of a CD and or a sample library and just slap it in your track, sort of in the if you will, in the locker room talks or the green room discussions with other DJs and stuff like that. You'll hear you hear guys talk smack about, oh nice, VEC loop 54 off the Vengeance 3 disc or something like that, because a lot of these guys were drawing from a lot of the same sample pools depending on what kind of genre you're in, and if we can nail what you're using, then you're in trouble. So always be trying to create your own loops, or if you're taking loops, edit them, reformat them, play with their rhythms, get something that's articulate for you. All right, clean up EQ, API 550 for a little bit at 7K, tiny bit at 7K. Oh, little bump at 1.5. This is a little unusual, 400. I think I just wanted that 400 boost to bump to like sit with my mid basses and give me a little bit more drive. Two LFO tools. Now, I get asked this one a lot, like, why are you using LFO tool twice? Okay, well, one is my primary sidechain. One is my primary duck. Okay, this is the curve that's giving me bounce, dynamic bounce off the off the side chain. Now the second one is put into split mode. So basically everything below 248 hertz is being double ducked. So this second one is saying specifically bring down and duck harder everything below 248 hertz. So now I'm getting like the benefit of basically just a general side chain, but I'm also getting sort of what I would describe as like a dynamic side chain. It's almost like a dynamic EQ. Okay. Gain plugin, I think that's just there. It's probably, yeah, it looked like I just needed a little more level. I didn't want to get it out of the fader, and I no longer had the option to use my sampler. And then single band EQ, a little bit of low end cleanup. You'd never notice that was gone. Everything below 57 hertz is just done. Sent off to bus 2, again with the R verb, that makes sense. Pre-fader send, what I got? Pre-fader send to isotope trash. Okay, so this is where I'm getting a little bit of bite and articulation and just kind of like dirt and grit off of the loop. Okay, so I'll play the loop. Bubble Perk is really, really cool. I'll just give you a taste. Just weird stuff, just kind of like bizarre, kind of like spacey sounds that just sit in the mix. Not sure where this would have come from. It was rendered down as audio. Clearly, if you look at the waveforms, there's some left and right sort of bounce. That probably would have come from something like a tremolo. I like to use the tremolo for like sort of an auto panning kind of thing. Lots of heavy bussing. So this went off to pedal board a little bit, which is a Native Logic plugin. Yes, this looks like a patch where I would have just basically had a ton of different effects, and then I kind of A/B them and pull them in and out and stuff like that. Looks like the wah is actually on, so I could have automated that for a little bit of wah. That might have been a cool thing. This grit pedal is basically sort of an emulation of a guitar pedal. It's just putting a little dirt and a little drive on there. So that is the first bus send. Second bus send going off to isotope trash again. So now all of those loops are getting sort of unified through using isotope trash for the kind of textural and distorted elements. Heavy send to FF Timeless. Okay, this is a really, really cool delay plugin. So this thing, I mean, it's just a preset. Feed me something. I don't know. I don't know where that came from. Normally, I'm just going through presets and finding something that kind of like lights up to me, and then I'll edit the preset. After I edit the preset, oftentimes what I'll do though is I'll save it as a user preset so that I can go back to it, because I think a lot of times like building your sounds and being being a producer is like stumbling on stuff that is signature and characteristic to you. So that would have been the send to the timeless, and then it looks like another send to the stereo delay. Yeah, I was experimenting going back and forth between say bus send 7 and bus 14, because I basically just wanted to see like which one of the delays was going to give me what I wanted. Okay, so there we go on that one. That would have been like. Cool. Now on to the scratch. I really, really love sounds like these. I like these sort of like just kind of biting percussive elements. It's almost kind of like a gated white noise, or almost like an automated hi-hat or something like that. And it looks like I can hear the swing on it. So this might be why you're seeing so much audio. Remember, I was saying, like, I'm kind of surprised that I had so much audio running through this, because it's going to sound kind of funny, but I don't like to commit. I really just don't like to commit. I mean, I will bounce in place when I need certain audio editings and, things like that, and I want to write certain automations, or I need to write fades in a certain way or something. But for the most part, I really just like to leave things on the synth, leave things on the sampler. But I think one of the reasons why you're seeing so much audio is because I wanted to hit them all with a similar quantize, and in this case, it's going to be this eighth note swing. It also looks like I created some user swings right here. Yeah, like this scratchy loop and stuff like that, which basically is like a groove template sort of thing. It's like you can kind of slave parts to each other rhythmically. Okay, so like if let's say you were programming like a beat for Depeche Mode or something like that, and it's kind of a rocky beat. Their stuff is really, really metric, so it might be like super on point, right? No swing. Sort of thing, right? Now, if you're programming for, I don't know, Bill Withers, or, I mean, not that he uses a lot of program music, but I mean, if you were programming for, well, I mean, I don't know, what's a good example? Maybe like Meat Beat Manifesto or Lords of Acid or something like that. It might be, you might actually want to use some swings. So instead of it's right? So let's say you had that sort of swing flavor and it was coming from a loop. What you can do is when you put another loop on top of it, they're not going to line up in terms of the way they swing, right? But you can take that original groove, turn it into a groove template, and then slave that other audio file to it. So now all of a sudden, instead of a hi-hat maybe going, it goes, right? And it matches in terms of like the rhythmic flow and the groove, what you're hearing from that original groove template. So that's what you're seeing here is like really the crux of the groove for Accipiter is really in the swing. So if you listen here, that's basically essentially my drum mix. I'm going to mute. That is the hat loop. Little bit of compression on that. That's unusual. This is probably going to be very, very slight, or a sidechain. Yep. Looks like I sidechained this hat to the kick. That's common for me. Stereo tool. This is definitely how I'm all about getting my stereo spread. Basically, anything above about 4.6, you're back. I like it. Anything above like about 4.6 got a little bit of stereo spread. The higher the pitched instrument, the more stereo spread you want or can get away with. Now, I'm not saying that everything needs like ridiculous stereo spread. I mean, I come from trance, and a lot of the trance mixes, they're so immersive is the thing. Reverbs that go for a mile in both directions, hi-hats that are incredibly spatial, that sort of stuff. I really, really like those types of tones. Even in the records that I like. I mean, like, if you listen to, like, really high, like, super well-produced records like OK Computer from Radiohead or something like that, the stereo spread on that record is just outstanding. You know what I mean? It's just huge. Yeah, it's just huge. So I've always really liked that stereo spread thing, and and this is not a judgment call. This is not a comparison call. I'm just saying that house especially does not typically use a great deal of like stereo spread. Techno does more often, but I do hear like a lot of really sort of monoed techno, you know what I mean? Where even the hats, like, they don't have placement. They're just kind of like right up the middle. Certainly kick sub right up the middle. Nothing wrong with that. But that's exactly my point. You're not going to stereo spread a sub. You're not going to stereo spread a kick.
You probably your lower mid bass, you wouldn't stereo spread that. If you have a higher mid bass that's being doubled, that's about where you want to start with your stereo spreading, is start to get that high mid bass sort of like branch out in the stereo field. And then by the time you're up into like hi-hats and stuff like that, you really, and crashes and white noise and that sort of thing, that's where you just want to slowly be adding up your stereo spread, which is good. To me, that's like a sign of like kind of a mature mix. Okay, so that is essentially my drums. Let's get and actually, I'm just going to keep the bass some on mute, and let's just sort of listen to. Yeah, I'll turn off my incidentals and effects, and let's just listen to the drum group. Now, once I have my drums in that sort of condition, I feel pretty comfortable about where my drum mix is, then I'll move into basses. And so again, you're not really going to get to see all of like the synths and not in this particular walkthrough. You're just going to see a lot of what ended up rendered as audio. And again, I think a lot of the rendering as audio really had a lot to do with wanting to use different types of quantize options. You can do some of that with MIDI, but the MIDI can be a little bit dodgy. It can kind of spit out stuff that's a little aliased or like imprecise, not precise, whatever that word is. So what you're seeing here is a lot of audio. Sub bass. Cool. So yes, moving out of the sub bass, this would have come off of likely something from the Arturia collection. I really like getting sub basses off those tones. Certainly, if you are familiar with the Arturia synths, they're serious business. They're not exactly child's play, and if you get the whole suite too, it's like a little overwhelming because there's just a lot to learn. And there's just so many classic synths and stuff like that even if you have the damn thing sitting in front of you, as a physical instrument, you would probably be spending months and months and months just trying to get it right, just trying to learn how it works. And so imagine that times like 20, where they're basically giving you just an arsenal of tools, and they're all complicated synths. It takes some getting used to, but it's worth it because they put out really, really good tones, and also I kind of feel like a lot of people in the dance world aren't really using those, which is, I don't know. To me, that's kind of exciting. I really like that. I think that certainly Massive, Silent, Serum, Spire, Ad Nauseum. Those are all great synths. Don't get me wrong, but it's like I think one of the things that makes me happy is using tools that maybe other people are not using, and finding tones that other people aren't using, or misappropriating tones. I really, really like grabbing kind of drum hits and like maybe even like broken grooves or like tech grooves or stuff like that were like off of like a dubstep CD or trap CD or something like that, or Moombahton or something like that. Obviously I don't really produce in those genres, but if all the house producers are reaching for the same house loops, it's really, really easy to sound, just predictable. So there's a little tip right there. Maybe try to like source tones from other places outside of your genre. This would have been V-Bass. So V-Bass is from Novation. That would then have been rendered. So let's listen to what is essentially my mid-bass. So forgive me, I wouldn't exactly call that my mid bass. To me, that's like much more of like it's part of the mid bass, but it's the higher end of the mid bass. So usually when I do my like bass lines, this is usually, not always. I'll have my kick, and then I'll have my sub, and then I'll have like a rolling low bass, and then I'll take that rolling low bass and double it, and either dump it up the octave on a different synth, or like high pass filter it heavily and put it into like a distortion and get that sort of like kind of grit off of it. So essentially my mid bass is two basses that are playing in unison. They're an octave apart, which I guess is technically not a unison, but their notes and rhythms are exactly the same. And then usually I'll bust those two off to their own bus, hit that with like compression or distortion or something like that, and that's what glues them together. That's where you can't tell where one bass begins and the other one ends. That's essentially a really really good way to get those like super rockin' mid bass tones. Let's see. It looks like this was doubled later in the track with just some basic shifts. I think it's more heavily filtered, and I can see a fade over there. But that's all you're looking at there. So this is like the V bass comp of the whole kind of high acid bass, and then this is just a double of that track with some slight differences, probably just some automation stuff. Okay, moving on to the plucky bass. Yes, that's the good stuff. That's what we're looking for there. And it's so funny, man. It's just like, as like a young punk rocker in high school and stuff like that, I was just like, I liked some electronic music. I was like super, super into industrial. I loved like Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson and, Meat Beat Manifesto and Lords of Acid, Ministry, Skinny Poppy, Throbbing Gristle. I mean, that was my jam. But I definitely was like not too sprung on electronic music. I suppose the only thing that I really liked in the electronic world from that era would have been maybe Crystal Method. I really wasn't Chemical Brothers. I mean, I like them now and stuff. It just wasn't really my flavor. But 15-year-old me would have listened to this bass line and been like, oh my God, I hate this music. Adult me, or 30s me, loves this bass line. I just think this just kicks fucking ass, man. So, it sounds easy. It does. Right? It's not exactly like compositionally going to stop the world. I mean, Mozart's not rolling over in his grave. I get that. But the function of this dirty bass really, really makes me happy. Okay, so, got a gain plug-in. Looks like it was a little too hot. Cleanup EQ, typical. Devil Lock, yeah, distortion unit. Simple as that. It's a distortion unit. I don't really need to go into the settings. You can, if you have this plugin, certainly feel free to copy the settings, whatever. There's not much to copy though. 4 knobs and a little switchy switch. That's all you got there. So that's the distortion. But maybe I'll be the distortion for you. So on, off. He's that Devil Lock is going to town for me. A little bit of color EQ. Here we go. So just a pretty aggressive boost. Well, I mean, a pretty high boost. We're talking 12.5K, little bump, and then 3K, a pretty aggressive bump. So that's my color EQ, and then the single band EQ. For everything below 20 hertz, just making sure that it's really not there. I just don't want that to get in the way of my kick drum or my sub bass. The bussing is, again, to the pedal board, pre-fader. Isotope trash, again, getting that unified sound from a little bit more distortion off the isotope. And then this, it looks like the tiniest, and I do mean the tiniest. We're talking about a minus 41.1 send to the bit crusher, okay? But as we've just talked about many, many times before, like, it's all about the sum of its parts. You know what I mean? That things are more than the sum of their parts, but then things are also are the sum of their parts. So, for instance, if I was to bypass all this processing, and it's funny because at that point too, I thought I was probably pretty rocking. Like when I had that bass line coming off the synth, I was probably like, oh yeah, that's pretty rocking. When I rendered it down as audio, started hitting it with multiple effects, then we really, really got into something that just hits like a brick. Looks like this was also sent out bus 8. Bus 8 would have been my bus sum. So my summing bus for all of my bass lines would have just had this little bit of our compressor running through it, just to kind of like just to kind of tighten things and glue things together and smash them up to the glass a little bit. Now, do be careful. Do be careful, because compression and bass don't mix a lot of the times. Like, compression can really take the weight out of your bass lines if you're not careful. But I have our compressor on the sum. Last thing that's happening here, and I'm sorry I skipped this, is just the multiband sidechain. I don't want to go on a huge tirade about sidechaining, but obviously traditional sidechaining, using like a trigger to then be routed into the compressor, so that every time something else hits, the compressor ducks, right? That's a pretty traditional sidechain. I don't want to say it's antiquated, but because there are definitely times when I prefer that. I prefer that real traditional use of the sidechain, but there are definitely times when when I think these newer tools are better. Okay, and the newer tools that I'm talking about are, in this case, VPS multiband sidechain, and then the other one being LFO tool. Also, even the Nicky Romero, it's just a damnable, dirty, little simple thing, but they each, almost like synths, they each have different voices or whatever. It's like not all synths are created equal, even if they're three subtractive synths, and they all do the exact same thing based on the exact same waveforms. They're just going to have a different voice. So this ultimately ended up being the sidechain compressor I used for what I consider to be like the core bass of the track. Right, just the slightest bit of ducking. Okay.